Recently, a member of my Facebook boxing group, Hatman Boxing, asked for my opinion about the 90s Polish heavyweight contender, Andrew Golota. Now, I remember the first time I saw Andrew Golota. He was fighting on the undercard of Lennox Lewis versus Phil Jackson. That was a WBC title defense by Lennox Lewis. I think it was in Atlantic City. And Golota was fighting some hillbilly looking guy. He looked like some bad Elvis impersonator. And he slapped this hillbilly around. I think he knocked him out in the first or second round, so the quality of opposition was poor, but he was a prospect at this time. And I remember wondering to myself, how would this guy do against Lennox Lewis? Because the main event, Lewis versus Phil Jackson, turned out to be a very one-sided affair. I think it went 7 or 8 rounds, but it was a one-sided affair. Phil Jackson was way out of his depth. And yeah, after the event, I was just wondering, how would that Golota guy do against Lennox Lewis? Because Golota was fast, he had good hand speed, he had punching power, he was accurate, he put his punches well together in combination, he seemed to move pretty well on his feet. These are all the things that I saw in Golota fighting that hillbilly. Again, I can't remember the guy's name, but he looked like, yeah, a bad Elvis impersonator. So after that, I didn't actually see Golota fight until I heard about a fight of his that he had with a Samoan heavyweight contender called Samson Puha. I believe that's how you pronounce it. That's how some people used to pronounce it anyway. And Samson Puha was a big puncher, a contender himself at the time. And I read that Golota was in trouble in the fight, that he was hurt, and that he actually bit Samson Puha in the shoulder. So I eventually got to watch the fight, and that gave me the first indication that there was something not quite right about this guy. Now, it wasn't unheard of for fighters to bite other fighters. I remember Herbie Hyde was bitten by Michael Bent. Obviously, there was Tyson Holyfield and what have you. But this was before the Tyson Holyfield fight when Golota bit Samson Puha. So, yeah, I thought, this is a little odd by this guy, because Puha had him in trouble, and then Golota in a clinch bit him on the shoulder. So it was a bit strange. After that, he picked up a win, a few more wins, and then he fought Donnell Nicholson. And Donnell Nicholson was actually a Kronk fighter. I don't think he was Kronk all the way through his career, but for a time he was a Kronk guy with Manny Stewart. But it was kind of strange for him to be a Kronk guy because he never really had the spirit or the will of a typical Kronk fighter. And I think did Golota stop him or beat him on points? I can't remember now. It was a long time ago. But still, by this point, Golota was still a fairly unheralded contender. And he was pretty much in obscurity. It was only the really hardcore boxing fans, like myself at the time, who knew anything about him, essentially. And remember, this is way before the time of the internet. So the only way to get information on boxing is especially when you're in the UK and you're trying to get information on fighters who are based in the United States, the only way to get it is through reading magazines, going on teletext and CFAX and stuff like that. If you're lucky, you might get to see some of his fights on the television. And in fact, Golota was, prior to him turning professional, he was an Olympian. Now today, someone who's an Olympian, you automatically assume they're going to turn pro. But back in the 90s, some of the Eastern European fighters didn't automatically think about turning pro because this was just after the fall of the Soviet Union. So to them, professional boxing, going to a foreign land and all that kind of stuff, I think a lot of them were a little apprehensive about doing it. So Golota actually, if memory serves me right, he went to the United States not actually to turn pro initially. He went to the United States to be a truck driver. I think he settled in Chicago where there's a big Polish community, and his intention was to be a truck driver. But I guess the truck driving wasn't going particularly well, so he thought, you know what, let me try and have a couple fights and see if I can get a bit of extra cash. And that turned into more fights and more fights. Then he hooked up with the Duver family, who are a very famous big boxing family, with Lou Duver and Dan Duver and Dino Duver and all those guys. So early on in Golota's career, he was trained by the Duvers. I'm not sure if Georgie Benton was involved in training Golota or not. I can't remember now. But definitely there was Lou Duver anyway. So even though he had the Duvers behind him, there was some kind of talk. He wasn't really seen as one of the main top contenders at this point. Then he fought Riddick Bowe for the first time at Madison Square Garden. And Bowe didn't take Golota particularly seriously. Bowe was, I think, a little overweight for that first fight and dismissive of Golota's chances, dismissive of any kind of threat Golota posed. But Golota was a revelation, and he surprised not only Riddick Bowe, because Bowe was very surprised. He surprised Bowe, he surprised a lot of the audience in attendance, not the Polish fans, because there was a sizable Polish contingent that came to watch Andrew Golota that night. But he surprised a lot of the viewing audience who'd never seen him or heard of him before. I think he surprised the commentary team. He definitely surprised Riddick Bowe. And he proceeded over whatever it was, the 8 rounds or something it was for that fight, to give Riddick Bowe a beating. The further the fight went along, the more and more Andrew Golota was getting on top. But inexplicably, Golota, and it was a very good fight, by the way. If you haven't seen Bowe Golota 1, go watch it. You know, Bowe Golota 2 is good as well, but Bowe Golota 1 for me was a better fight. A more surprising fight anyway. You know, and also, and I think a better fight because Bowe was stronger in the first fight than he was in the second fight. So, yeah, his combinations were very good against Bowe. He was the faster man. He was the sharper guy. His movement was better. He showed the ability to box on the inside and on the outside. A real revelation, but inexplicably, he kept hitting Riddick Bowe with repeated low blows. And this went on throughout the fight until eventually in the 7th round, he hit Bowe with some extremely low blows. Bowe went to the canvas and then all hell broke loose. The ring was invaded by Riddick Bowe's entourage and fans, and they rushed over and started physically attacking Andrew Golota. One of them had a walkie-talkie in his hand or some kind of radio, and he was smashing the radio on Andrew Golota's head. I think Golota actually got cut in that melee. Golota's, was it his trainer or manager at the time, Lou Duver, actually fainted. I think he may have had a heart attack or something, and he ended up leaving the ring on a stretcher. Riots broke out in the crowd between the Golota fans and the Bowe fans. It was just complete bedlam. So that was Golota announcing himself on the world scene. And what an announcement it was, because he not only announced himself as a formidable fighter, but he also announced himself as a bizarre and erratic character who resorts to fouling in a fight which he was actually ahead on the scorecards and looked like he was on the way to a legitimate victory. So a very, very strange performance. A few months later, he had a rematch with Riddick Bowe because there was so much controversy about the first fight. They had a rematch. Bowe came in much lighter, like nearly 20 pounds lighter, but he lost the weight way too quickly, Riddick Bowe. See, this is one of the dangers of these fighters who blow up in weight. Riddick Bowe was not only coming down from the 250 plus pounds he weighed in the first fight, he put weight on after the first fight. That was customary for Riddick Bowe. He'd put a lot of weight on in between fights. So he came down from God knows what, 260, 270, all the way down to about the low 230s to face Golota in a rematch. And it completely took it out of him. Riddick Bowe looked far stronger in the first fight. Even though he wasn't in particularly good shape, he was carrying excess body fat. In the second fight, he lost way too much. A combination of overtraining and losing the weight too quickly, you know, and he just didn't have his legs underneath him. The commentators were even saying at the time that his legs looked shaky in the first round, even before he got hit with anything solid. That's how weak he was. And he got dropped by Golota. I think it was it at the end of the first round? He was at the end of the first round, or maybe in the second round? At the start of the second round? I can't remember now, but he got dropped by Golota, and it was one of the strangest knockdowns you'll ever see, because Riddick Bowe took a couple shots, and then he turned away. You know, as if somebody had been thumbed in the eye, they would just turn their back on their opponent. But as he turned away, he then collapsed to the floor. It was one of the strangest knockdowns you'll ever see. He got back up. Bowe showed a hell of a lot of heart in that fight. But once again, he proceeded to take a terrible beating from Golota, an even worse beating than he took in the first fight. And once again, incredibly, Andrew Golota got himself disqualified for repeated fouling. Incredible. Just like the first fight. But this time around, you know, there wasn't any kind of large-scale riot. That was averted. So twice in a row, you know, Golota had got himself disqualified against Riddick Bowe, but twice in a row he'd shown himself to be a very formidable fighter. Just a guy with a very bizarre temperament. Then he fought Lennox Lewis. And going into the Lewis fight, that was viewed in the boxing press at the time as kind of a 50-50 fight. You know, there was a lot of people picking Andrew Golota to beat Lennox Lewis. It was only Golota's mentality which was making a lot of people unsure about whether he could beat Lewis. But it was certainly seen as a very competitive fight, a 50-50 fight by a lot of people. But Golota went in there, and one of the things that one of the journalists noticed, I didn't think about this at the time, I was just watching the fight. But one of the journalists in one of the publications, whether it was Ring or KO Magazine or whatever, maybe it was Boxing Monthly, they noticed that Andrew Golota had loads of acne on his back. And for those who don't know, Lewis blew Golota away in about 90 seconds. Yeah, he went in there, he hit Golota with some right hands against the ropes. Golota went down, he had the look of absolute shock on his face when he got up. One of the most shocked looks you'll ever see on a guy's face after getting dropped was Golota when Lewis dropped him in the first. And it was a very uncharacteristic performance by Golota. I know Golota is a strange dude, but, you know, given how well he performed against Bowe, people were shocked that he just got blown out by Lennox Lewis. You know, he didn't show any kind of fire or anything like that. He looked very timid from the opening bell against Lewis, and you know, he just got blown out. So one of the things that was noticed is that he had loads of acne on his back. And one of the journalists speculated, is this a sign of steroid abuse? Because when Golota was amateur, he actually weighed 200 pounds. Yeah. By the time he was professional, he was weighing 240 plus pounds. I think he weighed like 245 or 246 against Lennox Lewis, right? So he put on like 40 to 45 pounds of muscle from when he was an amateur to the time he fought the likes of Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis. 45 pounds of muscle. This is a guy who's 6'4". You're putting on 45 pounds of muscle? People, you can put two and two together yourselves. But regardless of that, he got blown out by Lewis. And another thing that one of the journalists said at the time, it wasn't a journalist, it was some trainer. I can't remember which trainer it was. Some boxing figure. And they said that they believe Andrew Golota suffers from anxiety attacks, and that he had an anxiety attack in both Bowe fights, and he also had an anxiety attack in the first Lennox Lewis fight. They said he clearly suffers from panic attacks. And maybe he did. Maybe that's one of the reasons that Golota's behavior was so erratic, because obviously in the Lewis fight he wasn't winning, he got blown out in one round, but in the Bowe fights he was winning those fights, he was beating Riddick Bowe up. Why the hell would he throw continuous low blows and get himself disqualified? It didn't make any sense at all, you know. But yeah, he had this reputation as the most volatile guy in boxing, apart from Mike Tyson. And I'll get onto the Tyson fight in a bit. But yeah, after the Lewis fight, he kind of went into the wilderness a little bit because people didn't take him seriously anymore. They said his temperament is too erratic, and he kind of turned into a bit of an opponent. He did have a good win, I remember, over Tim Witherspoon. That was a good win. It was a very faded Tim Witherspoon, but he did have a good win over him. But he was still kind of in obscurity. And then he fought Michael Grant. He was brought in to fight Michael Grant. At the time, Michael Grant was an unbeaten heavyweight prospect who was being groomed to be, a serious contender. Actually, he was a contender at the time, but he was being groomed to be a proper heavyweight title challenger. And he took on Michael Grant. He managed to drop Grant early in the fight. It was in the first or second round, but ultimately Grant managed to stop Golota late. Actually, Golota effectively quit. He was dropped late in that fight, and he didn't want to continue. So that was another example of Andrew Golota showing that he wasn't all there upstairs. So another disappointment for anybody who was a fan of Golota was the Michael Grant fight, particularly because he dropped the guy early. He went on to eventually face Mike Tyson, I think a couple years later. And again, in a Mike Tyson fight, he got dropped in the first round. I think it was the end of the first round with an overhand right. And then he was doing okay-ish in the second round. Tyson was winning the second round, but Golota was hanging in there. And at the end of the second round, Golota, he quit actually at the start of the third. He refused to come out for the start of the third round. He quit. And a lot of the people who were working with him turned their backs on him after that. They said, man, you've quit too many times. You've shown too much off-key behavior. We can't work with you no more. So, yeah, that was that. And strangely enough, that fight, it was originally a second round TKO victory for Tyson because Golota quit. But it got changed to a no contest because Tyson tested positive for marijuana. I don't know why a marijuana test would change the result of a fight to a no contest, because marijuana, it's an illegal drug, but it's not a performance enhancing drug. So I'm not sure why, why that happened, but it did. Golota went on to fight Chris Bird. Did he beat Chris Bird? I can't remember who won that fight. Was it Golota or Bird who won that fight? I think it might have been Golota who won the fight. Correct me if I'm wrong. Some of you boxing nerds out there, go check BoxRec and, remind me who won out of Golota and Chris Bird. I just remember it was a close fight. Golota against Chris Bird. He lost to John Ruiz. I remember that. He got knocked out eventually in the first round by Lamont Brewster. And at this point, he was just an opponent. Nobody was taking Golota seriously at this point. And I forgot to say earlier on, one of the reasons that Golota actually went to the United States wasn't just to be a truck driver. It was because he was fleeing some type of legal case in Poland, in his native country, because he beat up some guy in a bar or something. I can't remember if it was a cop. I don't know who it was, but he beat some guy up in a bar from what I remember, and he fled the country because he didn't want to get prosecuted. And that's when his, boxing career and all that kind of business ensued. Later on in his life, he ran into legal problems in the United States. He was arrested for impersonating a police officer and also for possession of several illegal firearms, or firearms without the proper license or, whatever it was. And I believe he was eventually deported. I know there was some kind of possibility of him being deported, but I believe Golota was deported back to Poland. And when he went back to Poland, he was worried about the charges from years ago catching up with him, if they were even charges. The police wanted to get hold of him from years ago before he started his professional boxing career. And I know he was worried about that. But yeah, he went on to lose a few fights towards the end of his career. He got knocked out by Thomas Adamek, a fellow Polish fighter, and a couple other guys. My overall impressions of Andrew Golota are, what if this guy didn't have the brain of a chimp and he actually had a normal functioning human brain? he could have actually been a very, very serious fighter in the heavyweight division. And as it was, he was, relatively serious because he picked up some good wins along the way. And he definitely beat the crap out of Riddick Bowe in 2 fights, despite losing by disqualification. So he was a wasted talent, definitely. But at the end of the day, there's nothing anybody could have done for him because, he was an unusual guy with a strange mind, and Lou Duval or Roger Bloodworth or all the different guys who worked with him, they couldn't talk any sense into the man. He just not wired like a normal person mentally, like a normal boxer, should I say, mentally. So yeah, it's one of those ones. I think he was very talented. He was a good puncher. He had a decent chin in his prime, despite the fact he got knocked out by Lewis and Brewster in the first round. In his prime, he had a decent chin. You go look at the Riddick Bowe fights. He took some big shots from Riddick Bowe and took them well. But the mind controls the body. When he fought Lennox Lewis, I just think he wasn't there mentally. And because he wasn't there mentally, he couldn't take the shots as well. Because he just looked panicked. Like he was panicking from the opening bell against Lewis. It's so strange. Because Lewis wasn't seen as any more intimidating than Riddick Bowe. In fact, Lewis was seen as more vulnerable than Bowe because by then he'd been knocked out by Oliver McCall. I know he'd avenged it and whatnot, but still, actually, had Lewis avenged it by then? By the time he fought Golota, I think he had. Yeah, he had avenged it by then, I believe. So yeah, Lewis was seen as more vulnerable than Bowe at the time. So why Golota was so anxious from the opening bell against Lewis, I don't know. But he was. And yeah, a talented heavyweight, a guy with fast hands in his prime, a good chin, good stamina, good work rate, good combination puncher. He could move, but yeah, he just had the brain of a chimp. And that really hampered his career. So those are my thoughts on Andrew Golota. Always an entertaining fighter. Always a guy who brings controversy and, entertainment. He would always give it a go and let his hands go, but it was what it was. So those are my thoughts on the 90s Polish heavyweight contender Andrew Golota. If you guys also remember Golota, if you were around watching boxing in the 1990s, give me your memories of Golota. And if you don't know about Andrew Golota, then yeah, a lot of his fights are on YouTube. So some of the fights I've talked about, you can go look them up on YouTube, and I'd be very interested to hear what you guys think. You guys who never saw him at the time, I'd be interested what you think of him watching him on YouTube now. Because there's a few people who came to me and said, I never knew about this Golota guy from the 90s. He looked quite useful. I saw him in the Riddick Bowe fights and he was quite impressive. Yeah, he was. He had ability, but mentally just wasn't there. So yeah, I'd like to hear from everybody about Andrew Golota. Drop it all in the comment section, people. It's Hatman, I'm out.